Hello and welcome to another episode of Scrutinise This, where we talk about all kinds of movies. In this series, we'll be discussing the Best Picture nominees at the Oscars this year. I'm Bardi, I'm the movie novice, and with us we have Dennis, one of the movie gurus. Dennis, say hello.
Nice to meet you.
There we are. And our second guru is Mr. Rowan Pierce. Rowan.
Bonjour.
Say hello.
How are you doing?
Good. Right. This episode we are going to be discussing The Zone of Interest. Now, what this film is about, it is about the Holocaust. It's about a family who obviously a Nazi family who live outside the concentration camp and how they try to live their life around.
A Nazi.
Then you're laughing and it's not a laughing matter.
A Nazi family sounds like something they created in a lab. You know, like it sounds.
Well, they're a family and they're Nazis.
I think that's a pretty apt description.
All right, this is on me then. I'm one of those children in the back of a classroom. Yeah, you can't stop laughing.
I think you're finding an excuse to the fact you're laughing at Nazism.
Oh God.
Highly inappropriate.
And the Holocaust.
Oh God, it's happened again.
But yeah, it's about a family who live next to the concentration camp. And the way I saw it is just about how they try to have a completely normal life with all this chaos going on around them. Where we have the benefit of not seeing the actual horrific scenes of what happened in the concentration camps, but we can hear things and we know it's happening at all times. So I think that's roughly a brief description of what the movie is about. So the family, the main gentleman, Rupert, he's a
Rudolf,
general,
right?
Yeah.
Rupert, but obviously we translate it for American audiences.
Okay.
Rudolf. So Rudolf and Hedwig.
Hedwig.
Yeah.
Hedwig, yeah.
Hedwig. So they are the two main characters. So husband and wife. The husband is a general,
an SS officer. I think he's in charge of basically the whole of Auschwitz.
He is, yeah. He's like the gatekeeper of the whole shebang. He's the guy in charge. He's the one who flicks the switches on and off, kind of thing. But that's the description of the movie. But obviously, I'm a novice. I can't do it justice. So for the benefit of the audiences, I'm going to pass it over to Rowan on this occasion to give us a description of the movie.
Buddy, you've given a very valid overview, bird's eye perspective of what happens in the story. So, the Höss family with his wife, 5 daughters, live right adjacent to Auschwitz, where there's horrific carnage going on just beyond the wall of their garden. You don't see any of that. The audience doesn't see any of that. And I guess I'll give the summary from an audience perspective rather than just an overview.
Yeah.
So that is basically relegated. All the suffering, all the hideousness is relegated to the audio of the movie. Things we hear in the background. We hear vague gunshots. We hear the sort of Auschwitz train coming in, and occasional dogs barking, and obviously these horrific chimneys. But it's all in the distance. What we see is, apart from the kind of barbed wire and the ominous wall, what we see is kind of like an idyllic pastoral house on the surface. So it's that crazy juxtaposition. The things we hear, partly because we know what the film's about, we do know about the context, but there's a horrible, ominous sort of background murmur to the whole thing, which paints what you see in such a distorted, disturbing light.
Oh, we've got someone's raising their hand.
Two things. First,
please.
So Rudolf Höss, I think Höss or Höss, I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. That was a real person, and his story is actually pretty accurate.
Yep.
So I think it's important to mention that. But also, there's a bit of an elephant in the room here. Are we gonna talk about the fact that we're coming into this obviously post Oscars? Because a lot of the build-up, the preamble, we were discussing, could this win? Will Sandra Hüller win? Will this, that? Obviously, we're post-Oscars here. Are we going to... I mean, because this actually ended up winning stuff at the Oscars, so are we going to also mention that? How are we playing this? I think there's no need to be secretive about it, so...
It won Best Foreign Film, right? It didn't win. Obviously, it didn't win Best Picture. That's what I hear.
It won Best Foreign Film, and it won for sound. Which
Yeah.
I think is a huge thing. It will come up a lot in the episode, but I just wasn't sure because I think there's no need to neglect the fact that we've doing this post Oscars. It still is a Best Picture nominee, and it still deserves the same amount of scrutiny as everything else that comes through our doors. Okay, day or night, we are open 24 hours.
Absolutely. 24
So
hours.
yeah, okay, that's the only
Okay.
thing I was gonna mention. But Bardi, let me throw the ball back to you and carry on.
Well, one of the first questions that I have is, there's an intro, which is just a black screen for about a few minutes before anything
Lazy.
happens, which
Lazy
I
editing.
found quite weird. Very lazy. I mean, it got to the point where I thought the video that I was watching was just had sound. I thought there's
Something wrong with your monitor.
Something's
The
happening.
Yeah.
HDMI cable wasn't
Something wrong with
connected.
my monitor.
You were like fiddling with a HDMI.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I started that film four
Yeah.
times because I didn't know
Yeah,
what was going on.
so
And-
that long period of 3 minutes, is it 3 minutes? Something long and inordinate. It's very deliberate,
Something
right?
like
I mean, that is done to basically realign your perceptions and make you basically rely more on what you're hearing than what you're seeing. Normally,
Yeah.
films, it's very visual first
Ah.
rather than auditory first. So, whereas this film, as I mentioned before, it's all about the soundscape, all the horrible stuff that's going on in the background and countering what you're seeing. So it does that. It's almost like an art piece kind of thing, because the film, in a way, has that feel. And I mentioned my friend the Frogwa duck earlier in the series, but with this film, you're not being force fed anything. You're kind of, that is a distant thing in the soundscape, which basically offers the context, forces you to use your senses differently.
And genuinely, in the beginning, I didn't understand what was going on. It caught me completely off guard. I genuinely thought the video was broken. So when I restarted it again, it definitely did that. It did make me sit down and just concentrate and think like, something's going on here, you know. And because I did watch it after the Oscars and it won for sound, I was looking out for things like that. So it definitely, I think, did that very, very well. Weird, because it caught me off guard, but I think that was very, very good. Dennis, any thoughts on the intro?
No, I
Anything
mean,
else
I
to add?
think Rowan, I mean, he's spot on. That film from the beginning, it's very clear about its ambition, right? It tells you that this is a film about what we're gonna hear, but also the sort of perspective of, obviously it's a film about evil, but this perspective of someone enacting evil in a sort of non-traditional, might not be the right word, but in a sort of
Traditional is actually quite a good word. I've got a little piece about that later. We'll talk about evil.
Perfect. Well, okay, perfect. Then I'll track back and I'll say in a non-traditional way, enacting. So enacting
Okay.
evil almost in a sort of passive way, and I think to begin the movie in this way sets a sort of almost like a gold standard ideologically, which and Rome said about the sound. So yeah, it gets off to a very interesting start.
Can I just say, out of all the films we've watched and reviewed, I think it has definitely the best intro out of the films, for me personally. And all it is just a black screen. Imagine the simplicity of it. It was so effective. So I gotta give it praise on that front. Now, there is a scene which I wanted to ask you guys about. So there's a little girl who is leaving apples. So he goes out at night and leaving little apples for the prisoners.
Yeah.
Of the concentration camp, and it's recorded in a really weird way because there's
Yeah, it's
Come
like
across
recorded
stuff at night.
on a thermal imaging camera. It looks kind of
exactly
inverted. Yeah.
inverted. Now, why do you think the cinematographer or the director chose that method to display what the little girl was doing?
There's something very Jonathan Glazer about that.
Yeah,
It just had a Jonathan Glazer look. But yeah, I was thinking about this myself because there's probably multiple ways you can look at it. But I think one of the ways is he just wanted to capture it as realistically as he could, and the most realistic way was just to use a digital camera at night and make it infrared, as if it's like a body heat detection camera, rather than flooding the set or the location with lights and making it look artificial. One of his rules for the film, I think, was just no artificial light. It was all natural light, and this is obviously taking place in the complete pitch dark. So the only way you could actually capture it was through thermal imaging.
So there was no artificial lighting or anything like that.
Pretty
used
much
throughout
not
the
throughout
movie?
the whole film.
No.
No. But there's obviously
That's
a
interesting.
creepiness to it as well, which I think lends itself.
Very, very, very creepy. I mean, it took me a few minutes to clock onto what she
But
was
I mean,
doing.
on the Jonathan Glazer front, he's someone who he likes the idea of sort of other worlds. If people have seen,
Sorry to interject, Dennis. Who is Jonathan Glazer?
he is a little mouse that I met. I was crossing the street and he ran up my leg and he said, "I've just made a movie." God, that's so stupid.
Oh, here we go.
No, he's the director of this. I think he's from London, if I'm not mistaken. But that might be wrong.
Oh, he's a
But
director.
he's a director,
of the movie.
yeah.
Right, okay.
He's a director.
I wish I hadn't
To be honest,
I wish I hadn't
he
fucking asked.
hasn't done that many films.
No.
Each of the films he does it takes a long
Yeah,
time.
no,
So he did
Okay.
what did he do? He did Sexy Beast with Ben Kingsley
yeah.
back in like 2000. Then he did a weird film with Scarlett Johansson.
Well, I was about to mention that film, Under the Skin, and I was about to, when we were talking about the night vision that Bardi was just talking about, it made me think of Under the Skin. I mean, Jonathan Glazer, he seems obsessed with, this seems unfair, but in a positive sort of way. He loves using cameras, different styles of cameras, hiding cameras away. Obviously in this film, I'm sure you're going to ask about the multi-cameras, but we'll get to that. Under the Skin does something similar. There are some scenes where sort of cameras are kind of sort of tucked away, hidden away. With the night vision, it seems a bit like, so people have seen Under the Skin, they'll know that it's somewhat a film about an alien sort of life form. With this, we're set in this world that's firmly, I mean, the Höss family life is, I mean, it's this kind of brutal interpretation of family life in Nazi Germany. So when it comes to the sort of one glimpse of humanity, which, bear in mind, we're completely deprived of for the whole movie, the one glimpse is this girl leaving apples for, she tucks apples away for the concentration camp victims. And then that's filmed in the night vision, almost suggests that this isn't even really taking place in the same world as the Höss family world, right? It's a completely different image. It's a bit like, you know, when you watch David Attenborough and it's like 20,000 meters under the sea, and it's like you can't just film that normally, right? Because it takes place in a different universe from what we're seeing. And I feel like Glazer probably wanted to go for that sort of almost alien look to it, because in that period of Nazi Germany, that sort of thinking was somewhat alien. Obviously, the movie builds on that quite heavily, but it's like Ron said, it's open to interpretation in so many ways, and a lot of the sort of movie does things that leave it quite open to interpretation.
Yeah, because I was going to say, Under the Skin has these really weird sort of sequences, and most of the film is quite verite, right? It's normal sort of digital filmmaking, but then you have these weird sequences pretty much in like complete darkness.
Yeah.
Of these, I can't remember what the fuck happens. This weird shit.
There's like a naked
kind of
bodies. There's all sorts of weird. Because the suggestion is that she's sort of the alien, kind of inhabits a body and harvests. I can't remember it too clear, and I don't want to go too into it because it's not super fresh on my mind. But in terms of the look of it, it seems like the ideas are there. From a filmmaking point of view, and it immediately reminded me of that, because the night vision, I mean, a lot of the time what we used to seeing night vision, and we're used to seeing it in like, you know, Gulf War movies, you know, things like that will have night vision. For it to suddenly emerge in here, there's no technological relevance in terms of it being filmed in the 1940s. So it's clear that this is all, you know, this is artistic license. This is something, there's a thematic, obviously, use for it. And it seems to be very much the case that in all this kind of sheer evil and this sort of mundane evil, there's this one sort of otherworldly presence, which is this young woman, which I read afterwards, he actually met the woman. She was like 90. So he had the chance to meet her. So I think in his mind, there was a presence of this.
I didn't realize that single character was actually based off a real person. Was it a Polish
real who lived there, and she actually, I think in the sort of IMDb trivia, she actually gave her dress and her bicycle for the shoot, which is actually the real one. So there seems to be a kind of like I said, in this depravity, she's sort of glimmers a bit like sort of this sort of alien angel, right? In these moments, and there's also something about the way it's filmed that it almost looks artificial, digital. It took me a moment to be like, is this some sort of CGI scene?
Because we're not used to seeing thermal that clearly. Usually, whenever you see something thermal from a show, you know, it's like a helicopter chase.
But that's what I mean.
You know,
It's always attributed to
the
war
image is very
as well.
distorted.
It's always attributed to.
But when you see it like
Yeah.
4K
Yeah.
thermal, it's just it does look
To be honest,
very,
I
very
think they did touch it up or something, because it does look in like a
fucking
pretty high
cheaters.
frame rate and
Crispy.
stuff. It's like almost too smooth.
Yeah.
cheaters. Nah, if they've done that, they've let me down big time.
He's,
Big time in
he's
my
broken all the rules of that.
Now, overall, because we did touch a bit on that scene, but overall, what did you guys think of the cinematography? Because there's one little thing I should tell you: it's not recorded in 45
35,
millimeters.
yeah.
45.
35.
35. Right, cut.
Yeah,
Say
it's not on celluloid.
30,
it's
it's
all
not.
digital.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah,
digital.
it's all
It's
shot
all-
on
it's-
Sony Venice cameras.
Yeah.
Which is actually, I think there was a Mission Impossible film shot on one of those as well. But it's all very hyper digital.
Yeah. All digital.
So, Dennis, what's your thoughts on the cinematography in general, and obviously the use of the cameras and the fact that it is digital and not 35
Well, obviously,
millimeter?
there's a second layer to this question, which is that, the way that it's filmed, first of all, it's a multi-camera setup for a movie. So anyone that knows a little bit about film production, that's not the norm whatsoever. I mean, almost all films will not set up 8, 9 cameras. I mean, Rowan mentioned something like Mission Impossible. For all the crazy stunts that they do, they will still not set up 8 or 9 cameras for various reasons. One of them is that, you end up with, hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage that you won't ever need. To set up 8, I think it's something like 7 or 8 cameras for certain scenes is interesting. And obviously there's a few reasons for it. And I think the cinematography leans into that quite heavily, because what you end up getting, the image that you end up getting, I think, is obviously one, sheer normality. And obviously that's what they were going for, because if you set up just one camera, you have a very clear, dedicated performance to that camera. Not to say that that person's looking into it, but there's an actor who knows approximately their framing, right? And based on their framing, they're going to put in a performance that will lean into that, using the knowledge of the script, the storyboards and whatever. With this, you defy that convention completely, and you're kind of acting almost in this completely free space, right? You're in this you're sort of like 0G kind of acting, because you don't know what you're getting hit with. So let's say he's set up, multiple views, which you can feel even in the editing, the way it's cut. There's a kind of, it's not jarring, but it almost feels a bit off, because it cuts from scenes that you wouldn't traditionally cut with. It kind of punches in at times where you wouldn't expect it to. Mostly because people don't do that coverage, right? There's no need to cover 30 versions of the same scene, because you won't need it in editing, whereas with this they had that benefit. But what happens is you have the sheer normality. So what the cinematography does, and obviously the end scene proves this quite a lot, is it almost makes it feels like one of those documentaries that you'd get of contemporary life, like how a supermarket or something, I don't know, something very mundane, and obviously leans into that so strongly, because you have behind the scenes, you have those sort of visceral images of Auschwitz.
Yeah, it feels like if someone had a Sony Venice and a tripod back in 1943 and just put it in this household.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exactly how it would look.
Exactly.
No other artifice.
Yeah, exactly. And we have these tracking shots where, to keep on to the topic of cinematography, we have these tracking shots where it almost looks like, and it sounds tongue-in-cheek and silly, but it almost looks like a video game sometimes. You have this level line of that wall that obviously separates them and the adjacent, obviously, concentration camp. And in the background, you have these kind of layouts. And it's in a video game where you can't quite get through, it's they haven't rendered it, it's just an image there, but your character can never sort of break through. It feels that way a little bit with the cinematography, where it's just it's just unrendered space in the background, but because we hear it, it makes it all the more sort of liminal and scary, and it's just going on non-stop in the background. But the cinematography,
It's going on non-stop. It never stops.
well,
It just never stops.
literally for their lives, because I think
problem.
they end up dying in 1945. So quite literally in their case, it never stops.
Just to go back, because we are in the discussion of obviously the cameras, the cinematography. There is a shot which I don't understand why it was there. So I need two movie gurus, and do you know what? I've got both of them here in front of me to explain it. There is a shot of a flower, and it transitions into this completely
the red screen.
Can you change my little blue
Change it
thing
red.
into a
Red
When I
mode.
do that with my hand?
It's going to be like the bit of Kill Bill
red,
scene,
like,
you know, where she sees red.
Right here. There we are.
Yeah.
And it stays on there for a few minutes.
Tarkovsky.
And then it
We've done Tarkovsky on this podcast before, but very Tarkovsky, that scene. Yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean, there's a little thing which I don't, maybe first viewing you might not pick up on it, but they actually till the ashes of dead bodies into the ground, into the garden, which then obviously the flowers grow and consume those dead bodies. Pretty macabre.
Yeah.
Oh,
But anyway,
right.
I guess could be just a comment on the pervasion of death coming through the soil.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, no, I think that is. I mean, that's how I read it. I mean, there's obviously an element here in terms of the sounds that we hear, not just diegetic sounds, but there's a sort of very strange score that it just it comes in, I think, about just a few times throughout the movie. In the very beginning, it opens with this sort of strange music. It sounds like I don't know, William Basinski or something, and then it drowns out, and then we have this like kind of, I don't know, this kind of like sometimes like this thud, or I don't know how you describe the sound. And I think sounds like that and that red image, I think, seep into what Rowan was saying, because the movie's quite clear about the fact that, I mean, how macabre is it that you would use the ashes of, millions of dead people just like a few feet away from you to, grow these plants? Because obviously it builds, that establishing series of shots builds as these very beautiful flowers. And I mentioned with the cinematography, it's shot like these kind of industry films, it's like, films about how food is made and things like that. It's so sort of simple, direct, and it's showing like, oh, look, these lovely flowers, we'll harvest them. It's and then it subverts that, goes into the red to be like, well, these flowers are born from pure evil, basically. And obviously the sound and that red contribute to that.
The chimneys are bellowing like pretty much ashes and death, not just on the soil, but pretty much everything. People breathe that in. That's partly could be the reason why the mother had to leave and resorted to, I think she like downed some vodka or some shit because she couldn't handle the stench of what the chimneys. And you could argue the families have just gotten used to it.
And also there's this almost like bureaucratic scene earlier in the film where they're discussing about how they're gonna sort of, he talks about we go counterclockwise and we'll push the
how they're gonna like systematize the whole,
and there's this like simplicity,
weird.
Obviously sheer brutal approach to how they're going to do
I mean,
it.
we have to touch on the banality of evil, which is a text which is definitely almost obliquely cited here, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know, we might touch on evil later. I don't want to.
Well, I mean, I think we can follow in the footsteps of the film, because evil it's present in every single scene, and obviously this scene, it refers to great directors like David Lynch, for example, and people who they use sound to almost inspire every scene of their movie. Obviously in this film it's a lot more clear, right? But anyone that's seen, for example, Lost Highway, they'll know that most of the sort of horror comes from sound, right? And it seeps in and it builds and builds. And with this film, it's that extra layer of there's real life, connotations to it, because that really happened. Those sounds really happen. And for us to watch it with that hindsight makes it all the more frightening, right? So when we have these moments, like when we're looking through the flowers, it's almost like a punch in the face to say, don't forget where we are with this,
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that horror edict that kind of Hitchcock used to say, like, what we don't see, the mystery is often more frightening than what we're presented in front of us.
Yeah.
The auditory sort of soundscape just it's ominous as fuck.
Again, I mean, we keep talking about sound, and I think for people who haven't seen it, and I mean, you shouldn't really be listening to this podcast if you've not seen the movie, and it's a film that warrants watching. But sound is obviously a major part of it, and I thought a lot about music. We'd come from a film, and and I'm sort of broaching on your territory, buddy here, but we'd come from a film that also stars Sandra Hüller, who it's a film that also doesn't use largely. I mean, this film does in part, so I don't want to say it's completely sort of soundtrack-less, but with movies like this, sometimes you present I don't call it a danger so much because I don't think it does a complete injustice, but if you think of movies that are similar in sort of themes to this, for example,
Schindler's List being one of them, right?
Well, no, Schindler's List.
There's violins.
Yeah, no. But what I meant to say is, I was gonna mention The Boy with the Striped Pajamas because obviously there's a very clear like, oh, we're just right next door to the sort of brutal evil, right?
Okay.
But what you are sometimes at risk of doing, and I think music is one of these contributors, because I think a lot of, and call them bad movies, they'll obviously rely on music to sort of drive the film to the point of, you know, complete boredom sometimes. But sometimes you're at risk with music of instrumentalizing emotion in a way that isn't suited to the overall film, to the overall themes, right? Because you've got in this movie, you've got this sheer attempt by the family itself, not just the movie, to obviously create a sense of normality. And it's like, oh, this beautiful house. We have a particular scene where the mum comes to visit, right? And it's so telling in that scene, obviously talking about Nazi Germany, and that sort of period of the Holocaust where she talks about, oh, the lady that I used to clean for could well be in there being, you know, I don't know what her mindset was at the time. What did she believe was going on? But ultimately being sent away to a concentration camp. And she talks about it with sheer mundanity. Like, for her, it's like the most normal thing ever. It's a bit like saying, oh, yesterday Bardi lived at number 3 Drury Lane and today he lives at number 4 Drury. You know, it's like the most basic thing ever.
There were times where the mother sort of mentions the shit going on behind the wall, and then Sandra Hüller basically tries to divert the conversation back to her flowers and back to the banal bullshit.
And I think any attempts to deviate from that, almost the sort of monotony of daily life, using something like music would have, I think, completely steered it off track. And I think the fact that sometimes we have to listen to it throughout, the sort of brutality going on behind it, and lay it in with these sort of conversations that, like I said, they're so telling. I mean, this woman, she goes from being a cleaner to her daughter owning this big house and deciding, oh, what should I take from the dead bodies? I'll take this jacket, I'll take these tops and these blouses, and, you know, it's
some lipstick.
And the lipstick that she takes, you know, and these are things that, you know, you've taken from the people that you interacted with every single day. That, I think, when we talk about the music, it makes it even more interesting that we only ever hear these like glimpses of like these big horns and whatever, and the rest of the time it's like we're neglected, you know, musically. You're like, listen, you're gonna sit and listen to the horror for the whole film.
I think the movie does a very, very good job of capturing just how normal it was for them, for all this chaos to be happening, and they just lived a normal life. Yeah, it does that very, very, very well. I mean, they're just having a normal conversation, and she talks about, oh yeah, we have the bees there for the honey. It's like, listen, for us, everything is, forget what's going on back there.
Yeah.
One question I wanted to ask, I'm going to ask it to both of you on this occasion because I want to know what your thoughts are on both. We'll start off with Dennis and then we'll move on to Rowan. What do you think the relationship is between obviously the director including this in the film, between the Nazis in this case Sandra Hüller's character and Rudolf, and animals and nature in the film? Because you can see that they have a care for animals. I mean, Rudolf spends about 2-3 minutes talking to his horse like it's gonna get better, but then he's also creating this horrific thing towards, obviously in this case, Jewish people. So what do you think the relationship is between the animals and nature in this film and how they're portrayed?
I've always had a suspicion of animal lovers, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, that question, I mean, it could be a podcast in and of itself. I mean, famously, people will try and attribute...
But there's definitely themes of that. There's definitely
it's an interesting fact that the Nazis actually introduced a lot of animal protection legislation. Like, you weren't allowed to kick your poodle, but yet you were putting fucking Jews in concentration camps. It's a bizarre thing, and they really play off that with Rudolf like stroking the dog for an inordinate amount of time, and the horse sort of eulogy and stuff.
Horse. Yeah. So they do have, because obviously Sandra Hüller's character as well, she's so proud of her flowers and the fact that she has bees and that they have honey. So there are themes of nature and animals. There is a theme there, and it just goes to show that they can have feelings, but when it comes to this specific topic, they were just completely unaware of
Yeah,
this.
I
Like,
mean,
we
the thing
really
is
don't
that
care. It's very strange, and that's what the film is very good at
yeah, and
capturing.
it goes. I mean, it goes back to what we were saying, and we were talking about, for example, that sort of mundanity of evil, and with her mother being there, and she tries to, Ron mentioned, she tries to always sort of divert the topic away from, you know, the evil that goes on. I think one of the sort of key points that the film tries to make is that you have to, in this situation, it's not about rationalizing evil, right? But it's about simplifying it to the point where you can sort of let it go on without really questioning it too much, right? Because if you know, the attempt to rationalize evil creates a kind of pros and cons sort of mindset, right? Which you don't want. A sort of, for there to be an efficient Nazi Germany, a pros and cons system doesn't work, right? So if you think today, contemporary times, if you have a war going on, there'll often be a kind of pros and cons, and rightly so, there'll be a sort of pros and cons mindset, and it allows for sort of both sides of the argument. With Nazi Germany, and I think a lot of sort of that era of cinema, but even films today made that obviously reflect that era, they try their best, and this film I think does it maybe the best I've ever seen, but try to capture that sense of that for them this was not evil at all. This was sort of a natural, because don't forget, you know, the Nazi Germany were people who believed in a natural order. They believed in, you know, they thought there was scientific, you know, there was a scientific resolution to all of this, right? They believed it's about the powerful overcoming and things like that. You build up that mythology enough to make it about something other than good and evil, right? So the sense of loving animals and things like that, it, you know, it's a visage, as the French would say, for that complete distortion of what's actually going on. Because if you think back to, for example, in the movie, and we'll try and keep it more sort of movie focused. I think there's no need for us to go into. We know
Definitely.
what went on. But in terms of the movie, it has some shots that, I mean, they're almost like Renaissance paintings, right? They're super beautiful, and they're framed so purposefully to say, for someone like Sandra Hüller's character, she's living in the sort of for her post World War One kind of world that she deserves, right? Or she feels that she deserves. And there's some, and again, she's a brilliant performer, nominated for another movie. I think she should have won. It is what it is. But she has great nuances in her performance, which shows that she's kind of a nobody, right? She's kind of a nobody who's kind of lucked into this situation, and now she treats it with a kind of majestic swagger, right? Which is that I deserve this. I deserve answers. The scene where her husband walks away and she kind of sort of ushers him back and says, "Look, you don't turn your back on me," sort of thing. And it's, you know, you watch it with a state of mind of like, who the fuck are you? Like, you've come here off the back of the death of millions, right? And you're trying to sort of play it off as if, you know, this is not only deserved, but, you know, this was in the making the whole time, right? Animals, they seem to fall in line with just part of their mythology, and this film does so well to sort of, again, divert that mindset, because again, we talked about the red screen, but it ends up, you know, it creates the scene with the horse, the scene with the dog, it ends up almost becoming a bit ludicrous, right? As you keep watching it, you're thinking, this is complete madness, right? This is complete madness. Obviously, the final scenes where we go to sort of contemporary times, we go back to the sort of, now it's become a museum, but when you see it and you run through these sort of static shots of all the sort of millions of pairs of shoes and things like that, you kind of sit there and you're like, fuck yeah, it was complete madness, you know, everything, forget even the real event, just having seen it in the context of this 1 hour and a half movie, it was utter madness, right? And all of these sort of interactions, they just keep building that sense of, you know, all of this is obviously going to implode in, you know, in probably the most infamous ways ever, but the film does it in this discreet, interesting way throughout.
Right. So the next question on this movie is, how do you guys feel like evil is represented in this movie? Because when we're asked, you know, if we have to think of someone evil, you know, you kind of have the natural characteristics, and we've seen other Holocaust and World War II films, and when we think of Nazis, we kind of have a general idea of how evil and how, you know,
abhorrent they were. Yeah,
open they
yeah.
were about. Yeah, exactly. Whereas this movie kind of does it differently. So how do you think it's, you know, represented in this movie? Because it's not how you would expect it to be. I mean, let's start off with Rome. Rome,
Yeah.
how do you feel
So I
about
mean,
its
a film like the
representation?
Schindler's List, which is probably the most famous Holocaust film,
Mhm.
early '90s Spielberg, you get a Ralph
Yeah.
Fiennes character, who he can't really control himself. He's like he has like this uncontrollable evil in a
Yeah.
way. It's not rational. It's kind of irrational, and that's more of a traditional treatment of the villain, right? He's
Mhm.
clearly the villain in that film. With this film, we're not shown pretty much any of the victims or any sort of ostensible protagonists. We're just showing the villains, and we're showing the villains doing not very villainous stuff. We're showing the villains just doing the mundane, tending to their gardens, signing paperwork, having meetings. It's banal, and we'll talk about the banality of evil. But it's that
Mhm.
it's that sort of depiction of evil as just the mundane, and it makes you think: how did people, or how did the subjects of this film, how did that happen? It makes you put yourself into those shoes and question yourself. Could this ever happen to me? Could I be so ignorant of what's happening right over the wall and what's happening pretty much in front of our face? So the traditional sense of evil is the Ralph Fiennes in the Schindler's List character, where
Mhm.
he's almost, he can't help himself. He just wants to shoot
Yeah.
random
He's almost
victims. Whereas
ostentatious.
with
Yeah.
this, that's the traditional. It's almost like the Little Red Riding Hood villain, like the dark energy, the
Yeah.
wild, the wild villainous energy.
Yeah.
With this, it's banal. Like Rudolf Höss doesn't kill anyone directly. Neither did Eichmann, right? They're pencil pushers. They're bureaucrats. They have meetings. Everything is distanced from the actual from the carnage and from the murder, which in fact, even though they're not committing the murders themselves with real guns or weapons or whatever, the pencil he's signing these papers with is causing way more
Yeah.
death than any single gun is, right? So yeah, I think the film does comment a lot on Hannah Arendt's 1963 book, The Banality of Evil, which basically documents Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem. And Eichmann was pretty much the orchestrator of the Holocaust. As I said, he didn't kill anyone directly, but he signed the papers and did the bureaucracy, and which basically enabled 6 million Jews plus to be gassed. So it's that treatment
Crazy.
it's that treatment of the bureaucratic distance that exists between these people and the actual evil that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause
It makes you think about how are these structures in place maybe today or ever, which distance you from the evil, but which is multitudes more evil because the systems in place enable that to happen.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that I'll add is that on the if we think back contextually, for example, Rowan mentioned this to me before. I'll bring it up now because there's obviously another connection because there's the same actor, but the white ribbon. So Rowan, you mentioned it to me before when we were discussing the film, and obviously the lead in that, which I'm gonna get his
Christian Heidel.
is it
Heidel,
Heidel or he? Yeah, I wasn't too sure, but
I think Heidel.
he
Yeah.
stars in both, and obviously there's a bit of a connection because for those who have seen The White Ribbon, and I actually did say to Rowan, I was like, I think we should even do an episode one day on The White Ribbon. That's a film that takes place before World War One, and the reason why that's specifically important is because those people in the film, most of the children, they're at an age where come World War Two, come Nazi
They would
Germany,
later become Nazis.
yeah, they'll be the adults that will effectively push the sort of Nazi Germany agenda. And I think with any kind of Nazi Germany interpretation and however it's shown on screen, and I agree with Rowan. If you go to something like Schindler's List, there is an attempt, and I don't mean this in a mean-spirited way, because the film is still effective, but there's an attempt to sort of maybe Hollywoodify the events, and it does. I can understand why it's doing that, but obviously in doing so, you create, in that sort of evil character, you create a sort of a madness to it, and I don't think that's completely accurate, because if we go back to something like the White Ribbon, that sort of that hate is born from such a young age that it becomes completely normal, right? I mean, just to think, you have to sit and listen to the screams and this every single night. You are aware, they have a meeting at one point in the movie where I think they say, we're going to have like 12,000 a day. Think of the sheer numbers that we're talking about. 12,000 people a day. And for that to be, normal, I mentioned before, it can't be evil anymore, because if it's still evil at that point, then it becomes difficult. You'll have to have the question of, hold on, should we be doing this? There's like that Peep Show scene where he says, are we the baddies here or what? So that sort of, it's all in the context.
Sorry, can I just add one thing? Sorry, just one, because would you think it's fair to divide it so much, so to say that it's either going to be Zone of Interest or Schindler's List? Because I would think that there's people from both scenarios which probably did exist at the time. Okay, Zone of Interest is a bit more realistic, and not maybe every single person was a Ray Fiennes maniac.
What the Zone of Interest does well is it shows that you don't have to be a wild, brutal savage. No.
Right? But I'm saying they can coexist. I'm saying that they probably
Fair
was.
Enough. But then it's more an indictment on the systems rather than the individual, though. If you think about it, because Ralph Fiennes is not the system necessarily, although the system enables it. It's him being a maverick, sort of trigger-happy psychopath.
Right? There's a suggestion in Schindler's List, which I don't necessarily maybe adhere to, which is if you took that Ralph Fiennes character, you plucked him out of that world that he's in, and you took him to a non-Nazi world, let's say you brought him to this day and age, there's a suggestion that he would still want to kill. He would still be driven by hate, right?
Absolutely.
And if that were the case, the Nazi Germany system wouldn't function, right? Because not everybody 100%. In Nazi Germany thought that way. They were almost, I mean, the Nazis themselves.
But Rudolf Höss is the exact opposite. That's the thing. I mean, he's such a conformist. He'll go into a room and he'll literally bow and say what he needs to say, and
he doesn't even raise his voice at any point in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. He's very level-headed as well. He's
very calm, 100%. Very calm throughout everything. So I completely. I'm just saying that I think both characters could have existed at that time, but in terms of the movie world, I think Zone of Interest does it slightly better of capturing.
Well, the thing that I wanted to wrap a little bit on that topic though was the effectiveness of this movie is obviously it captures that Nazi Germany. Like I said, these are ideas that are born from a long time ago. They were constantly being obviously manipulated and injected with these ideas, and obviously we know about Nazi Germany propaganda and how that eventually came.
But you can argue it still exists within us. It's exactly
the point I was about.
It's just an anomaly in history.
It's exactly the point that I was just about to make, because this movie is 1,000 times scarier, because we do live in a world where we see perpetual evil go on all the time, right? All you have to do is go on your phone. It takes about 30 seconds. You're going to come across instances of evil, whether it's simplistic hate or whatever. We get taught,
and evil systems enabled by pencil pushers.
Exactly. So
by the structures of the system, right? Not just
exactly. So I think what makes the movie scary is that while we do go about making our lives look great on Instagram, making our homes look very fancy, and we do also worry, we think, oh, how cute our horses and everything. If you let's say if we go back to, let's say, make this movie 10 years after the Holocaust happens, right? We copy it just as it is, we make it 10 years. It's going to be obviously equally powerful. Today, there's a kind of cold resonance to it because, and we'll get to that end scene. I think we can maybe end the episode on that end scene, because I think it's maybe one of the best end scenes I've seen in a long time. But if that end scene shows anything, is that this isn't about what happened in the past, right? This is an ongoing battle for us to confront something that we may not necessarily see as evil. But the truth of the matter is that we do perpetuate those ideas, right? Because if you are able to sort of live your life very casually and be, you know, happy with everything that's going on, and still witness the evil, even if we're just hearing it, even if it just comes up on our social media feed, if it just comes up on the news, then we are, you know, I don't want to say no different because that's a heavy term, but you're following in the footsteps of these ideas, and the film lays that out quite clearly.
But you are no different. That kind of is what
I guess so, yeah. I mean, the only thing is,
the fact that
the only reason, sorry, I'll just say to clarify, the only reason I said I didn't want to say we are no different is because I didn't want to necessarily compare the Holocaust to events that go on. I still think events that go on today are instances of evil. I just didn't want it to seem as though I'm saying, oh, this is the same as the Holocaust. I hate when people do that. But yeah, go on, sorry.
But yeah, I mean the banality of evil, which I think is completely relevant.
For sure.
In relation to this film, it's basically saying if we were in Nazi Germany, we're not going to be the ones gunned down for protesting. We will stay in line and we will support the system because human beings are ultimately conformist.
Yeah.
And that's
well,
not obviously
and not only conformists.
Films like this,
not only conformists, but we
that
become actors in that, right? The fact that it's digital as well, the fact that it's digital kind of brings it into the modern age, right? There's no old time footage. There's no old shots of Hitler. You know, a lot of movies will do that. World War II movies will show, you know, old Leni Riefenstahl movies throughout to say, oh, look, this is set in the 40s, whatever. But this film, it's like Ron said, it's like you just brought a Sony Venice back to 1942, whatever, and you were just setting it up and, you know, hit go. So yeah, I think the effectiveness of it can't be understated. It's a film that, I mean, it hits you directly if you let it. If you sort of embrace what it's doing, it's, you know, it's almost painful at times to watch it.
To get onto the last bit now of the podcast, I want to talk about the ending of the movie. Now, Dennis hinted earlier that he's saying it's one of the best endings he's seen in
a long time. Yeah,
in a Holocaust film,
a
or
long time
in
a
any
Holocaust
film? No, I
film,
would say in any
film,
and I'll try and elaborate.
In any film, it's a very powerful ending, especially when they kind of blend the shots in, where it shows Rudolf walking down the stairs, and then it shows at one point the cleaners cleaning Auschwitz as well. And I think we mention it now is the cameras that they use and the fact that it is digital. You can do that.
Yeah, I mean,
you can merge those films and lay it in that manner.
What the film doesn't feel like is, you know, in like Titanic, where you see the actual ship at the beginning, you go like in this underground thing, whatever, and you see the ship, and that's the contemporary view of the ship.
Yeah.
And then we go to the fiction, we go to all the
so illustrative stuff, right? World. Yeah.
But what this doesn't do, this doesn't do that. It's exactly the same eye. It's exactly the same camera that was used in the household.
Yeah, that's a great phrasing, actually.
Seeing the wall and everything.
Yeah.
But then it's the same eye where we're coming back in the contemporary day and seeing the museum and seeing all the shoes and all the sort of disability equipment that was taken away and horrific shit. It's not a big change in perspective, really.
Yeah.
We're just jumping time.
Yeah, and the way that we jump time is, I mean, I that scene where he walks down the stairs and he starts almost like gag, and then there's a suggestion that he's vomited, or we never punch him too close. He steps down a few more steps. He looks down this corridor, which is the most fucking liminal space. I mean, anyone can post that on Reddit because it's fucking liminal. And then he gags again. And then we just suddenly, I mean, the cut is so instant where it took me a few seconds to be like, okay, now we're in, we're 60, 70 years down the line. But like Ron said, because it's the same eye, it almost looks like it's like a jump cut of, we just went 80 years into the future. And there's something about that scene that I couldn't stop thinking about afterwards, because if you think back to, there's not a lot of films actually today that really try to mix media in that sense, to go from, a fiction film, obviously fiction in the sense of there's actors and everything, and then it jumps to this almost like documentary ending, but it does so almost with no acknowledgement, because I know there's a few movies, Spike Lee's done this a few times, so you go and you watch, you know, scenes from Vietnam War or whatever. But it obviously it acknowledges the fact that it's documentary footage and it's mixing it. But with this movie, because it cuts back and he's sort of stood there looking, it's almost like some sort of time warp, you know, Gattaca situation where he's like, oh, did he
So
glimpse
well
it,
done.
or is he suddenly been overwhelmed by the sort of spirit of the moment, or is the evil almost we sort of left with this question, and then obviously we sort of wrap. And I also love the fact that those final few scenes, I mean, it says nothing, and the film really throughout kind of says nothing, right? Everything we glean is from, like I mentioned, little glimpses of the dialogue and things like that. And then we have those sort of bureaucratic meetings and things like that, where it's so, I mean, it's so simple that if you don't really pay close attention, you'd think that they were talking about, you know, how many toothbrushes they're going to, you know, sell this week or something, because it's said with complete simplicity, you know. And yeah, that sort of almost like mixed media, I want to call it media because it's the same medium, but that sort of style change at the end, it hits you so hard, and it goes back to what I said about the fact that this is a movie about now. This is no less a movie about now as it is about the Holocaust. And the best movies will always be about the time that they're shown in, right? Because there's no use in making a Holocaust movie for people in 1942. They won't watch it. We are the ones that will watch it. So what's the grand effect here is it has to sort of hit us in the gut, right? There's no need for it to completely go over our heads the whole time, and this movie does it in such a great way. I would even go as far as to say it's probably one of the most hard-hitting, maybe, Holocaust films I've ever seen. Because there's no positivity. We mentioned the girl with the night vision camera, and even she's kind of almost obscured to us, right? She's there, she's glimpsed of as, like I said, this kind of proto-angel figure, digital angel that appears to us a little bit. But aside from that, there is no good in this movie. It's just complete sheer, you know, evil madness.
I think Kubrick had a criticism, and when we might be criticizing Schindler's List quite a bit here, but he had a criticism of the fact that there's a feeling of almost triumph at the end of that.
Yeah.
The fact that Oskar Schindler is able to save over 1,000, I think, Jews, and that's a triumph, right? Whereas all the millions of other people, you know, there's nothing triumphant about that time in history.
That's why I said that I have a problem with those characters.
But Spielberg kind of makes it, he kind of paints it with that sentimentalism and kind of thing. That veering towards trying to have a good ending type thing.
This is like 1,000 more, you know, alive than there would have been dead. So it's like a mini victory.
I mean, he's trying to Hollywoodize it by highlighting that victory. Whereas this, there's obviously no victory.
There's no hero, right? I mean, obviously, I don't want to suggest that the characters like Oskar Schindler, I mean, there's obviously a heroism to it. I mean, even saving one person, I guess. But with this movie, I guess the great thing, and to go back to that cut of he's there at the stairs and then we cut to the thing, it feels a bit like, you know, people often say that thing where something like Nazi Germany is only a few kind of steps away, right? We're not as far as we think, because the mindset is always that, oh, that will never happen, we're super far. Obviously, we're talking now at a stage where there's obviously quite a big war going on in with Israel and Palestine now, but there's always a suggestion, and I guess maybe Jewish people today will feel this with a sort of greater pain, right? But it's always just a few steps away. I'm sure for people growing up in 1920s, 1930s Germany who were Jewish, it never felt like it will get that bad, right? It probably, because it's so gradual.
I mean, look at the Weimar Republic. It was the most technological, advanced, scientifically
and a lot of
culturally advanced society in it.
And a lot of them were Jewish, right? A lot of them were living pretty good lives, and a lot of them, if people are into sort of history, and you can read accounts, there's great accounts.
But that's arguably part of the problem. Like, they were blamed for the crash of 29.
Of course, of course.
Being the bankers.
Yeah. But what I meant to say was a lot of them, even when some of the more horrendous things started to happen, we're talking prior to Auschwitz and Birkenau and all of that, a lot of them decided to stay in Germany because they thought this is probably the worst it will get to, right? Let's say early stages of propaganda or politicians coming out and saying, oh, these are the baddies. They probably thought this is the worst it will get, right? And obviously, they were gravely wrong, I mean, to the point where I think there's a famous saying where someone in the US, they get told for the first time about what may be going on in Auschwitz, and they get told that it could be in the millions being killed. And he says, I don't believe you. And the sort of whistleblower says, no, I'm not lying, and so on. And he says, no. He says, I don't doubt you. He says, but I don't believe that such a thing would ever kind of happen, right? It's not that I don't believe you telling me, but I don't believe that this situation could ever take place.
That's even possible.
And I think this movie does a great job. That ending kind of, it's almost a slap to the face to say, look, this is only ever like 1 or 2 steps away from happening. And I think that's completely true. And because of the simplicity and mundanity of it before, like I said, you end it and you think, whoa, the sheer madness. And the thing I wanted to end on, we mentioned this in the chat, the sort of motorbike revving its engine throughout the film. The fact that was real. The fact that Rudolf Höss hired someone to keep revving an engine around the house so they wouldn't hear, men screaming in pain and being all the sorts of crazy things that went on. I mean, that's almost like post-evil, right? You got like post-affix, but I mean, that's almost post-evil, because that's to the point where like he's got to blank his mind of the fact that millions are dying. He's got to start thinking about, okay, how do we deal? When you do like apocalypse movies, it's like they can't even think about, can I drink Coca-Cola anymore? They've got to think about, how can I not get bitten by a radioactive snake? It's like it's gone post anything normal, and that.
But calling it post, I think like one of your points was saying like if you could replace the Ralph Fiennes character in a different context, he would be malicious, psychotic, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you replace the Rudolf Höss a character, a bureaucrat, you could replace him with any normal bureaucrat, any lawyer, any sort of guy who works in admin. It's not the morality doesn't come into it.
But that's what I mean, right? If you plant, that's what I'm suggesting, this post-evil, because if you plant that seed inside people, and I talked about the politics of today, and I don't want to get too much into it because I don't know, people will maybe jump the gun with what I'm saying, but today it does happen that we sometimes go full circle with more liberal ideas, because people will treat it as, oh, hold on, are we the victims here? Once you start having that mindset, it goes beyond you casting aspersions or being evil in that sense, and then it becomes about, well, hold on, I'm right here, I have to make sure that people hear my voice and so on. And then suddenly that mundane evil is born, right? Because when you think that you're doing it for the right reasons, you're no longer being evil, right? Because the Ralph Fiennes character, he's very aware of his evil, right? He's sort of more in line with characters like Hannibal Lecter, who for him the thrill is to cast that pain onto the other person, which, like I said, Nazi Germany doesn't work if you thrive only on that, because there wouldn't be enough, right? There wouldn't be enough of a system if you had to just, if you have to get a football team of, just people who are mass murderers, you wouldn't have enough. So you have to almost be post-evil about it, and I think that's what this movie does so well.
Cool. Yeah, agreed.
Cool.
So do you think they should have won Best Picture, looking retroactively at the retrospective?
Well, I think it's interesting that the one that did win it is effectively a kind of World War II movie, right? Obviously, it's set in a very different world from World War II, but when you watch this, one thing that becomes, I think, glaring with Oppenheimer is that obviously the Jewish plight is, we get trickles of it throughout the film, right? It's never shown. It's never that big of a sort of center of attention. But I don't diss Oppenheimer for it, because historically it didn't come to light as quickly as it maybe should have, and so on. And even when it did come to light, there were other sort of political issues. But it's apples and pears. But I personally thought, and my review will reflect this, but I think this is probably the best movie made that year, I would say. So yeah, in the Dennis Oscars, I would have given it the Oscar. I think it's a masterpiece for so many reasons. But I don't want to diss Oppenheimer. I mean, I gave it a pretty positive review, and it's an enjoyable film, and it does also touch on
there's nothing to take away from Oppenheimer. Yeah, Oppenheimer's still a great film.
I would have given it. I would have given this.
But look at this guy hating. You're such a hater. What was your original score for Oppenheimer?
I gave it a tepid
Rowan
5.
went from like a 20 to like a 4. This guy was like,
Your original score said
The original one doesn't count.
Oh, okay.
I've scrubbed that from history.
Ron's like a CIA agent. He's like, Abu Ghraib. I don't even know where it is. Where is Abu Ghraib? Where is it? He does a resort in Egypt, innit?
Can I tell you one thing though? The actor playing Rudolf Höss, he's wearing a white suit at one point, and it just felt like the actor was ready to go from set straight onto the Oscar stage with that outfit.
Right?
Like
That's
he was
very
just
snazzy.
so
But
very
again,
snazzy.
on the
He was about to
mundanity of
go-
evil, I think the fact that they're always sort of so snazzy almost. I mean, Russell Brand got in trouble for joking about Hugo Boss, so I won't do it here. But the fact that they're kind of all, very kitted out. And look, it's all plays into it. Should we do the reviews?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
He wants to
I
go.
think we stick to it. Bardi going first. I think that's the way it's been. I think since the Stone Age, I believe they always let Bardi go first. So Bardi, hit us with
Absolutely.
your review.
I'm going to give this film a 9 out of 10. Straight 9 out of 10. I don't think it makes a difference whether we're doing this post or pre-Oscars, genuinely. The fact that you know exactly what's going on in the film and you don't see anything, and it's like a complete opposite of Schindler's List in every way. Like Schindler's List is very graphic. It has that whole musical score. This has the complete opposite, and it still gives, if anything, a more effective message of what pure evil is, just by using sounds. For me, it's an amazing film. For me, it's great. I think it definitely should have won. Out of all the films that we've done, I was always a bit biased towards Oppenheimer, and I wanted it to win. Now that I've seen this, I think it was a robbery. Because it's a great film. The fact that it can give that powerful message. I mean, we spent the majority of this podcast just talking about just how evil was represented, and we probably could speak for another 2 or 3 hours, comparing other films and other villains. But this does it so well, and the fact that ending, where it incorporates 1940s to today, using the same camera is genius. So for me, it's a 9 out of 10, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna give the same. I'm gonna give a 9. I think what I like is the film isn't afraid to be boring, isn't afraid to be banal. If we take the situations that happen in that film, in any other context, it'll be horrendously boring, right? But it's the fact that the soundscape and the subtext basically overshadows everything we see. It's harrowing. So yeah, and also what we picked up on about, say if the Sony Venice was around back then, we put it on tripods around the house. That's how it would look. But then we've taken the same Sony Venice into 2023 and went to the Holocaust Museum. It's in the same reality.
Yeah.
And that's
it's like a
hard
cinematic
to watch,
wormhole.
and it makes you, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's that lack of sentimentality or lack of over contrivance or artifice which makes it more real and more evil and more horrendous, and it makes you question yourself, like how do these systems of cruelty come into play when the actors are just pencil pushers, they're just conformists, they're just like you and me, or to an extent, right? So yeah, I knew it wouldn't get the best picture just because it's not Oscar bait and it's almost too intellectual, it's almost too self-aware. Yeah. So but it deservedly did win best foreign the best foreign
and
picture
best sound. Yeah.
So that's credible. So
Can I just add one thing? Let me add one thing. In back 2012, I actually had a chance to go. I was in Poland and went to visit Auschwitz as well. And I think for people who do watch the film, who've actually been to Auschwitz, to the museum to see it, it does add an extra layer to it. Because it's so... Even though there's only brief shots, imagine there's a whole museum full of just those brief shots of stacks of shoes and bags and shirts and all this kind of stuff. So the fact that I've also been there and I can, that guides explaining everything to me, it definitely adds an extra layer to it. And obviously most people have been, so I think people really
you've led me perfectly in the more context you have in this, the more you can enjoy it. Obviously, you say that with some precaution. Enjoy it in an artistic sense, because there's not a lot to enjoy in that sense.
Yeah.
It's definitely a movie that
Artistic representation.
it's
is a safe word
a
to
work of
use, yeah.
art. I mean, I have unparalleled respect for it. I mean, it's beautifully shot in times, and it does a lot of things that, I mean, I think Jonathan Glazer he's someone in control. I've said before, I love it when a director comes in and he's in control of that subject matter. He knows exactly what he wants to get out on that screen. The one thing that I will say a little bit, to just not shit on Schindler's List too much. I mean, it's not my favorite movie ever, but I do think that in the context of...
It's still a good film, though.
Yeah, I think in the
still a good
context of the
film.
Holocaust, I still think that there's a great importance to sometimes seeing... Obviously, it can sometimes be almost too difficult to watch, but to see the horrors go on, to see them in the visceral sense of, what exactly went on is sometimes also important, because obviously if every film worked like The Zone of Interest, you'd eventually kind of...
it's kind of a counterpoint to
Exactly.
to the
It
stuff
needs,
we
yeah,
the
it
graphic.
needs it needs
Yeah.
Schindler's List in a way, because for us, obviously, there's not documentary footage of everything that went on, but it needs Schindler's List as a sort of context point, because for a lot of people, Schindler's List is the sort of access point to just how brutal the Holocaust was.
I
mean,
agree.
It was full of death and everything, so some films need to display it. Obviously, the sort of grandeur of Hollywood feeds into it, but in a way, it maybe also needs that to be more mass audience, because more people should know about what went on. In terms of my review, I'm going to do a Dennis classic here. I think this is a 10 out of 10. That could be that it's a very Dennis style of movie. After I watched it, I thought, I wonder if when Ron saw it, he thought, oh, this is something Dennis would love, because it's shot in a way that is something that I...
You ever heard of the director Ulrich Seidel? He's an Austrian director. He shoots all his movies like this. It's literally like fly on the wall type thing.
But the thing is, I think it's
Check that guy
more
out.
than fly on the wall. Obviously, it is fly on the wall in the sense of the way it's multicam and things like that. But Jonathan Glazer's obviously looked at this. He's kind of peered beyond the sort of traditional cinematic void for this film, right? He's obviously thought, okay, how can I use all the tools available to me to go beyond sort of a traditional telling of this story? Because when you think about the premise of the story, and obviously there's a book that it's based on that has a sort of very fleshed out story of an affair and things like that. The movie doesn't even mention it in passing. It just focuses on just that sort of family unit and very little else. But the more I thought about it, the more I went back, I rewatched a few scenes, and I'd seen a few openings and things before. There's so many small details. There's like a scene where there's like a series of military jets that fly overhead. I hadn't even picked up on it the first time around. Things like when you hear a lot of gunshots at one point, then you hear the motorbike revving. That's a great scene. There's a scene where she goes out to close the windows at night, because obviously there must be a lot of bodies burned that day. Obviously the stink is strong. So many small details that make it so harrowing, and it's like the more you watch it, the more it starts to turn into a horror movie, right? It almost fits the sort of traditional horror cameo. I think it's one of those films that the more it goes down the line, I don't think it will have some sort of popular resurgence, but I think the more people watch it, the more they'll respect what it's tried to do. So for me, it's going to be a firm 10 out of 10.
Wow. All right.
So that's like
There we
the
are.
highest for me. But I'm guessing because you guys gave it 9.
Well, 10 is the highest out of 10, yeah.
I've always noticed that, actually. I've always
I
noticed
meant
that.
to say, because I've given other movies a 10, but the highest in the Oscars series, because I didn't give anything.
Yeah,
else
I
a
mean,
10.
this
collectively.
clearly makes it, like, what is this, 28 out of 30. This clearly is a winner
Yeah.
among the Scrutinize This
100.
Yeah.
team. Yeah.
And do you know what? It didn't even start off as a 9 for me. I watched the intro and I was like, this is a bit boring. What the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And it just crept
Didn't
up
have the
on me.
HDMI cable in, that's why.
Well, yeah, exactly. And plus I was watching it in
Listen,
reverse.
we've
so,
scruted the hell out of the Zone of Interest. Are we doing American Fiction next week?
100%.
American Fiction,
Yeah.
and then we can do a kind of wrap up the Oscars, our thoughts in general. We do maybe a little sort of
Okay.
instantaneous.
We can run through
podcast.
each category, all 23 categories, spend an hour
Yeah.
on each.
Before we leave, guys, Bardi has a OnlyFans, so subscribe to that if you have time. And Rowan,
Obviously, no pressure. If you guys
Rowan
want,
is willing to massage people if they subscribe to this channel. He said no strings.
But bring your own oil.
There's nothing, no extra rules. Just subscribe.
There can be strings if you're into strings.
Well, if you like that kind of, I know. Yeah.
So subscribe, because my baby hasn't been fed in weeks and weeks. Because no subscription means no cowpole. So yeah, are we done? Can I?
Just one thing, with regards to the zone of interest, when she gets annoyed with a maid, it just reminded me of Dennis so much, because I know you have problems with your maids, every now and again.
First
Dennis.
of all, my maid
With all that
deserves it.
fucking
Okay,
money
my
they've
maid
made off-
deserves it. Okay, she can look. Hey! If she doesn't like Britain, go back. Okay, push.